America looks stronger than ever on paper. Record markets, record spending, record promises. But something is quietly breaking beneath the surface. Millions of Americans aren't protesting, they aren't rioting, they're leaving. Not the poor, not the desperate. Educated workers, parents, nurses, psychiatrists, families with futures. This isn't about politics, it's about survival. When a country becomes so expensive, so hostile, and so psychologically exhausting that leaving feels safer than staying, something has gone fundamentally wrong. This is the story almost no one wants to talk about. Why America is becoming a country people don't want to live in anymore. What's happening right now isn't loud, visible, or officially acknowledged. That's exactly why it matters. There is no exit visa in the United States. No mandatory reporting when a citizen leaves. No press conference when a family quietly sells their home, closes their accounts, and disappears from the system. As a result, one of the most important demographic shifts in modern American history is barely measured. Estimates suggest roughly 9 million Americans live abroad at any given time, but even that number is fuzzy, outdated, and almost certainly understated. What matters more than the exact count is who is leaving, and why now. This is not a retirement wave. It is not seasonal travel. It is not wealthy elites buying second homes. The pattern is younger, working-age adults, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, often college-educated, often employed, often with children. These are not people pushed out by poverty alone. These are people opting out of a system they no longer trust to deliver stability. Historically, Americans left during wars or extreme recessions. Today's exit is different. GDP is high. Markets sit near record levels. Unemployment headlines remain low, yet underneath those numbers, affordability has collapsed. Since 2020, median rent is up over 30% nationally. Health insurance premiums have surged past $8,400 per year for individuals and $23,000 for families. And real wages have failed to keep pace with inflation for most workers. The cost of staying has risen faster than the cost of leaving. What makes this moment unprecedented is timing. People are leaving before the official crisis, before mass unemployment, before a declared recession. That signals anticipation, not reaction. When rational actors exit early, it suggests confidence in future conditions has already broken. This quiet departure also explains why it's ignored. Emigration doesn't show up in unemployment reports. It doesn't spark emergency legislation. It doesn't trend on nightly news. It simply removes people, taxpayers, workers, parents, from the system entirely. No layoffs, no protests, just absence. And absence is dangerous for any society. Because when people stop fighting to fix a system and instead plan their escape, the problem is no longer political, it's structural. This silent exit is the foundation for everything that follows. Because people don't abandon a country on impulse. They leave when the math, the stress, and the future no longer add up. What turns quiet dissatisfaction into permanent exit is not ideology or emotion, it's calculation. Once people recognize that the system is no longer stabilizing their lives, the question changes. It stops being, "Can I make this work?" and becomes, "How much risk am I absorbing by staying?" At that point, leaving isn't rebellion, it's risk management. The cost of survival in the United States is no longer static. It compounds. Housing is the clearest example. Since 2019, national home prices have risen roughly 40 to 45%, while mortgage rates more than doubled. That single shift pushed monthly payments to historic highs, even for buyers putting 20% down. Rent followed the same trajectory. National median rents are up over 30%, with many metros far exceeding that. Housing is no longer a predictable expense. It is a leveraged position tied to interest rates, insurance costs, property taxes, maintenance inflation, and local fiscal pressure. Staying exposes households to price volatility they cannot control. Property taxes reset upward. Insurance premiums surge. HOA fees rise. Repair costs inflate faster than wages. The longer someone stays, the more surface area they have for financial shock. Stability is no longer cumulative, it's fragile. Transportation adds another layer of compounding exposure. Vehicle prices remain elevated compared to pre-2020 levels, but the real damage comes from financing. Interest rates transformed cars from depreciating assets into long-term liabilities. A vehicle with a $40,000 sticker price routinely costs $55,000 to $60,000 over the life of the loan. Insurance premiums are up more than 20% in just 2 years, and repair costs rise alongside labor shortages and parts inflation. Mobility, once a tool for opportunity, has become a recurring financial drag. Then comes the quiet tax of everyday living. Food prices remain structurally higher even after inflation cooled. Utilities reset upward and rarely fall back. Childcare averages $10,000 to $15,000 per year per child, often rivaling rent in major cities. Student loan payments have resumed, removing hundreds of dollars per month from household cash flow. None of these costs collapse a family on their own. Together, they create permanent pressure. This is the trap. Survival expenses now rise faster than income for most workers. Real wage growth has failed to keep pace with post-2020 cost resets. Even households earning $70,000 to $90,000 increasingly fail basic affordability tests. Not because they overspend, but because the system's baseline has moved beyond reach. When full-time employment no longer guarantees solvency, staying becomes a gamble. This is where leaving enters the equation. Exiting the United States used to mean uncertainty. Today, it increasingly means predictability. Relocation costs are finite. Flights, deposits, documentation, and setup expenses typically fall into a low thousands of dollars range depending on destination. More importantly, those costs stop. They do not reset annually. They do not escalate with interest rates. They do not balloon through hidden fees. This contrast matters. Staying in the US exposes households to unlimited downside, leaving converts exposure into a closed equation. That alone flips the risk profile. People are not chasing luxury. They are capping volatility. They are choosing environments where rent behaves like rent, not leverage, where utilities don't spike unpredictably, where daily expenses scale with income rather than outpacing it. This isn't about being cheaper. It's about being legible. The timing is the most important signal. People are leaving before official collapse, before mass unemployment, before a declared recession. That tells you the system has already lost credibility at the household level. Confidence breaks long before data catches up. Individuals respond to lived math, not macro narratives. This is why exit accelerates quietly. Emigration doesn't show up in unemployment figures. It doesn't trigger emergency policy. It simply removes people from the equation. Workers, consumers, taxpayers, gone. No protests, no demands. Just withdrawal. And withdrawal spreads. Once someone exits and stabilizes, the decision becomes visible proof that survival doesn't require constant stress. That validation is powerful. It transforms leaving from radical to reasonable, from fringe to overdue. Confidence erodes not through panic, but through example. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. As more people opt out, the remaining population absorbs higher costs. Tax bases narrow. Insurance pools shrink. Housing markets distort further. Staying becomes even more expensive, reinforcing the incentive to leave. This connects directly to what follows. When the cost of survival becomes open-ended, people stop trusting institutions to protect them. They disengage emotionally. They reduce commitment. And once that trust is gone, no amount of messaging can reverse the calculation. Because when a system forces its citizens to choose between permanent financial exposure and physical exit, the decision stops being personal. It becomes structural. Once people realize the cost of staying is open-ended, they begin searching for the most dangerous source of volatility. That search inevitably leads to healthcare, not as a service, but as a control mechanism. In the United States, healthcare is no longer designed to restore health. It is structured to manage behavior. The system does not fail randomly, it fails predictably and always in the same direction, toward compliance, delay, and financial submission. Start with the baseline. Employer-sponsored health plans now average over $23,000 per year for family coverage, with workers directly paying roughly $6,500 of that before a single bill arrives. Individual plans routinely exceed $8,000 annually. That cost does not buy certainty. It buys access to a second layer of payment. Deductibles commonly sit between $2,000 and $4,000 per person, meaning coverage only begins after thousands are already spent. Co-pays stack on top. Out-of-network penalties multiply costs instantly. Prescription drugs operate under separate rules entirely. Even after paying premiums, many households remain effectively uninsured for meaningful events. This is not accidental. It is the architecture. What makes this system uniquely destabilizing is that costs are unknowable in advance. There is no transparent pricing, no enforceable estimate. A routine visit can trigger lab fees, screening codes, or administrative charges that surface weeks later. Medical billing has become probabilistic. People cannot budget for it, they can only fear it. That fear shapes behavior. Americans delay care, skip appointments, avoid diagnostics, decline follow-ups, not because they are reckless, but because the system punishes engagement. Preventative care is marketed as free, then quietly monetized through add-ons and coding. One interaction can cascade into hundreds or thousands of dollars in charges. The result is widespread avoidance. This is the compliance trap. People remain tethered to employers not because of loyalty, but because coverage loss is catastrophic. Changing jobs, starting businesses, or reducing hours becomes dangerous. Healthcare locks labor in place. It suppresses mobility. It enforces stability through threat. Medical debt reflects this reality. Over 100 million Americans carry healthcare-related debt, and medical bills remain a leading cause of bankruptcy. Even insured households are exposed. A single emergency can erase savings built over decades. There is no ceiling on downside. Paying into the system faithfully does not cap risk. This is where the healthcare structure connects directly to emigration. People are not comparing doctor quality or wait times. They are comparing uncertainty versus predictability. Outside the US, healthcare functions as a service with posted prices and capped exposure. Inside it, healthcare functions as a financial weapon that activates when vulnerability appears. The emotional toll is as damaging as the financial one. Constant exposure to potential ruin rewires decision-making. People live defensively. They avoid physical risk. They suppress activity. They accept stress as normal. Health becomes something to manage carefully, not improve freely. This undermines trust at a civilizational level. When a system designed to preserve life instead threatens livelihood, legitimacy collapses. People stop believing institutions exist for their protection. Healthcare becomes the clearest signal that the system is no longer aligned with human stability. This matters because healthcare is not an isolated failure. It interacts with everything that came before. Rising living costs reduce buffers. Employment insecurity increases exposure. One health event then becomes the final trigger. Not because it is rare, but because it is inevitable. Once people understand that healthcare represents unlimited downside with no guaranteed protection, the decision to exit accelerates, not emotionally, logically. And when citizens conclude that staying healthy in their own country is financially dangerous, the social contract is no longer strained. It is broken. When healthcare becomes a threat instead of protection, people look to income for safety. That's where the illusion finally collapses. For years, the economy has been presented as stable, strong growth, low unemployment, resilient consumers. But those headline numbers only describe motion, not condition. What's cracking now is not activity, but capacity. Americans are still working, still spending, still borrowing, yet fewer can absorb even minor shocks. That contradiction is the warning signal. Start with debt because debt is how the illusion has been maintained. Total U.S. household debt has surged past $18.6 trillion, the highest level in history. Credit card balances alone exceed $1.3 trillion, with average interest rates hovering near 21 to 23%. Buy now, pay later usage has exploded, including for essentials like groceries and utilities. Debt is no longer a bridge between paychecks. It has become the paycheck. This matters because debt only sustains consumption if income is stable. That assumption is breaking. Job losses are accelerating beneath the surface. In the first half of 2025 alone, US companies announced over 700,000 layoffs, a pace not seen outside major crises. Layoffs are concentrated in sectors that once defined security: technology, media, retail, logistics, professional services. These are not cyclical jobs. They are structural roles being eliminated or permanently thinned. At the same time, hiring has collapsed. Job openings are falling, not rising. The labor market isn't tightening, it's hollowing out. Many who lose jobs are not replaced. Instead, remaining workers absorb more responsibility without more pay. This is how unemployment stays low while insecurity spreads. That leads to the most misunderstood metric in the economy: functional employment. Roughly 1/3 of working Americans now earn wages that fail to cover basic living costs without debt or assistance. They are employed on paper but economically fragile. This is why official unemployment figures mislead. A job that does not provide stability does not function as employment in any meaningful sense. Wages confirm the problem. While nominal pay rose after 2020, real wage growth flattened as inflation reset prices higher across housing, food, energy, insurance, and transportation. The result is negative purchasing power for the majority of households. People did not fall behind because they stopped working. They fell behind because the floor moved. Meanwhile, policy pressure is intensifying. Tariffs now function as a hidden tax on households. Estimates suggest they add roughly $2,000 to $2,500 per year in cost to the average family, disproportionately hitting lower and middle-income earners. Vehicles face price increases of $4,000 to $6,000 per unit. Clothing, household goods, and construction materials follow. These costs do not show up as line item taxes, but they extract income just the same. The timing is critical. These pressures are arriving simultaneously. Debt servicing costs rise as interest rates stay elevated. Job security weakens as companies prioritize margins over growth. Prices remain sticky even as demand softens. This combination creates a trap. Households must keep spending to survive, but every dollar spent increases fragility. That fragility is visible in savings. The personal savings rate remains near historic lows. Emergency funds are depleted. A growing share of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 unexpected expense without borrowing. This is not a consumer confidence issue. It's a balance sheet problem. Recession risk doesn't appear first in GDP, it appears in behavior. People delay purchases, downshift consumption, avoid commitments. Businesses respond by cutting costs, which means fewer jobs, fewer hours, and less investment. That feedback loop is already active. This is why the current phase feels confusing. Spending hasn't collapsed, it's become forced. Consumers are not confident, they are cornered. Credit fills the gap between income and survival. That works only until it doesn't. When credit limits hit, defaults rise. When defaults rise, lenders pull back. When lending tightens, consumption falls sharply. That's the crack. Corporate behavior confirms it. Companies are not expanding aggressively, they are optimizing. Automation accelerates. AI adoption replaces entry-level and mid-skill roles. Capital spending prioritizes efficiency, not employment. This is not a temporary slowdown, it's a re-architecture of labor. The result is a widening gap between economic appearance and lived reality. Stock indices remain elevated while job security erodes. Corporate profits rise while household balance sheets deteriorate. Official narratives emphasize resilience, but resilience requires slack. And slack is gone. This links directly to the earlier sections. Rising living costs removed buffers. Healthcare exposure amplified risk. Now income itself is unstable. When all three pillars weaken simultaneously, staying becomes a gamble with shrinking odds. People sense this before it is declared. They don't wait for recession headlines. They act on signals: layoffs in their networks, stalled hiring, rising debt balances, shrinking savings. These signals don't inspire protest, they inspire exit. The economic illusion cracks not with panic, but with clarity. When work no longer guarantees security, debt no longer bridges gaps, and prices no longer retreat, the promise of stability collapses. At that point, optimism is irrelevant. What follows is not outrage, it's withdrawal. And once withdrawal begins, it accelerates quietly, reshaping the country from the inside out. Once the economic illusion breaks, the damage does not stay financial. It moves inward. What follows is social breakdown, and that phase is already underway. Money stress does not simply reduce spending, it rewires behavior. When people live under constant exposure, unstable income, rising fixed costs, uncertain healthcare, fragile savings, the nervous system never resets. Stress becomes chronic. Decision-making narrows, patience disappears, trust erodes. This is not a moral failure, it is a biological response to prolonged threat. At scale, that response reshapes society. Social cohesion depends on surplus, not just money, but time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. When households operate at the edge of insolvency, surplus vanishes. Family time collapses. Community participation declines. Civic engagement drops. Informal support networks weaken. People retreat inward because they have nothing left to give. This is measurable. Social participation rates have fallen sharply since 2020. Volunteerism is down, religious attendance is down, local organization membership is down. Even casual socializing has declined as people work longer hours, juggle multiple income streams, or remain mentally preoccupied with financial survival. A society optimized for productivity has hollowed out the relationships that once stabilized it. At the same time, anger rises. When effort no longer leads to progress, frustration looks for targets. Public discourse becomes hostile. Everyday interactions feel volatile. Road rage increases. Workplace conflict rises. Online spaces radicalize faster. None of this requires ideology, it requires pressure without relief. Historically, this pattern appears whenever economic stress outpaces institutional credibility. The psychological toll is already visible. Anxiety and depression rates remain elevated years after the initial shock of the pandemic. Burnout is no longer confined to high-stress professions. It has spread across income levels. The defining emotion of the current phase is not fear alone, but exhaustion. People are tired of adapting, tired of optimizing, tired of pretending that instability is normal. This exhaustion matters because it removes restraint. Societies rely on self-regulation, people choosing cooperation over conflict because the future feels worth protecting. When the future looks hostile, restraint weakens. Short-term thinking replaces long-term planning. Risk tolerance increases in destructive ways. Social norms decay quietly before they break loudly. The data already hints at what comes next. Violent crime stabilized in some areas after post-2020 spikes, but property crime, theft, and fraud continue rising. Financial stress correlates strongly with these trends. When legitimate paths fail, informal and illicit ones expand. This is not a prediction. It is a historical constant. Layer politics onto this environment and the danger multiplies. Polarization is no longer confined to elections. It has entered daily life. Institutions are widely distrusted. Media credibility is fractured. Official statistics are doubted regardless of accuracy. When no shared narrative exists, consensus becomes impossible. Every stressor is interpreted as evidence of malice rather than failure. This is where timing becomes critical. 2026 will not dangerous because of a single event. It will dangerous because multiple unresolved pressures converge at once. High debt levels collide with weaker job security. Cost structures remain elevated while wage growth stalls. Government capacity is constrained by deficits and interest expenses. Policy tools lose effectiveness. Social patience is already thin. In that environment, even modest shocks become amplifiers. A market correction, a spike in unemployment, a supply disruption, a geopolitical escalation. None need to be catastrophic on their own. The danger comes from sequence. When systems are stressed simultaneously, recovery windows close. Psychologically, this is when societies fracture. People stop believing conditions will improve within the system. Hope shifts from reform to escape, from participation to avoidance, from collective solutions to individual exit strategies. Emigration is one expression of this. Withdrawal from civic life is another. So is increased aggression. The United States has historically relied on optimism as a stabilizer, the belief that tomorrow will be better justified sacrifice today. That belief is weakening. Surveys consistently show declining confidence in institutions, future prosperity, and upward mobility. Younger generations in particular no longer expect to outperform their parents financially. That expectation gap is destabilizing. When hope collapses, narratives harden. People sort into camps, complexity disappears, blame replaces analysis. This is the psychological precondition for instability. Not riots, fragmentation. A society where groups no longer recognize each other as part of the same future cannot coordinate solutions. This connects directly to the earlier collapse points. Economic fragility created stress. Healthcare risk amplified fear. Labor instability removed security. Together, they produced psychological overload. Social systems are now absorbing that overload and failing. What makes the coming period more dangerous than the last is accumulation. The pressure never released. It stacked. Each year added new costs without removing old ones. Each adaptation became permanent. There was no reset, only endurance. Endurance has limits. Once those limits are crossed, behavior changes quickly. People disengage from norms they no longer believe protect them. Trust evaporates, cooperation erodes. The gap between individual survival strategies and collective stability widens. That gap is where instability lives. This is why the next phase will not feel like a sudden collapse. It will feel like tension everywhere, a background hum of hostility, a society running hot with no cooling mechanism left. Systems still function, but barely. Any disruption carries outsized consequences. The most dangerous moment for any country is not when it is poor or even when it is divided. It is when people stop believing that staying invested is rational. Because once citizens conclude that disengagement is safer than participation, decline no longer needs to be triggered. It simply continues.